The junior senator is in the House.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
We got a lot to do. We're going to skip the rundown tonight on this Tuesday evening because U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse is in the House. Embarrassingly, I don't know, for me or for him, first time in 3 years since his television show started that he's been able to carve out a little schedule. So I got to rough him up over that. Hopefully this is the beginning of a continued, always good working relationship. Thanks for joining us tonight. Let's look at a headline to start off this thing. This has been one of the senator's major issues. The appointment of Judge Gorsuch has been made. Here's what our senator said, amongst many things, during the process.
What could be more involved in politics than to open this ocean of dark money that's flooded into our politics?
Senator, what I mean to suggest is that I believe every justice on that court is trying to apply the First Amendment and the laws of this country faithfully.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, Dan. Thanks for having me on for the first time in 3 years.
This was pivotal. This was incredible. And there's so much to talk about. We could do the entire show on this nomination because the politics, the precedents, the forevermore that may have occurred now because of the nuclear option. You were trying to drive at this guy because of dark money.
Yes.
This is one of your peeves between environment and, you know, money
unlimited,
not
and
transparent.
Invisible.
What were you most worried about?
What I'm most worried about with this guy is that instead of being a conservative jurist, i.e. somebody who adjudicates by judicially conservative principles, he becomes the judicial tool of the corporate establishment. And what makes me nervous about that is that before Justice Scalia died, you had this amazing run of about 20 5-4 decisions that came out with all the Republican appointees doing the exact same thing and always to the benefit of the big corporations, whether it was unlimited money in politics or making it harder for people to sue them whose products had hurt them, or making it easier to discriminate against employees, or you can kind of take your pick. And I don't want to see a United States Supreme Court where a consumer, an employee, a labor union guy, somebody who wants fair elections, comes into the court and looks up and says, okay, I got a bench here that's going to rule against me because of who I am. Not because of the merits of my case, but because of who I am.
Well, the individual identity of people was a constant theme in this nomination process, and he did everything he could to dissuade anybody's worry about any kind of class overriding another.
And now we'll find out.
We'll see.
He's in. We'll see.
But
proof will be in the pudding.
Kev, run this particular piece of audio. I want to see what the senator was driving at here.
Said earlier that sometimes, I think I'm quoting you correctly, sometimes big corporations can capture an agency. That's a well-known principle of administrative law and of economics. Just let's be sure that our Supreme Court doesn't get to be one of those agencies that's captured on any subject.
Nobody will capture me.
I hope not.
A moment, amongst moments there. Your point was?
Same one I made before. There's this 5-4 tradition that the Republican appointees on the court had established of basically ruling for big corporations.
So labeling the court an agency, there's a little insult there.
Not particularly. I mean, in the broadest sense of the word, it is an agency of the government. Senate is another agency
It's one of the
the
three
government.
branches of government. We don't have to get into the semantics.
Well,
but
it's just one piece of the third branch.
Right.
There are also all the circuit courts of appeal. There are also all the
Sure.
district courts.
At the end of the day, let's talk about what happened here, though. We've got the nuclear option used by the Democrats. We have a Hatfield and McCoy type of thing that has been going on here in your chamber for quite some time. The Merrick Garland thing obviously feels like a red card in soccer for the Democrats. You couldn't get over it, you meaning the group, couldn't get over it. Couldn't find a way to get to 60 votes so that there was some kind of Understanding that, look, at the end of the day, it's a Scalia replacement, and the balance of power, if you will, or philosophy remains more or less the same, and it's the next couple that really matter.
I disagree with you on that, actually.
Okay, tell me.
Because the court, at the time that Judge Gorsuch was nominated, or previously under Garland, was 4-4. It was an evenly balanced court between Republican appointees and Democrat appointees.
Yeah, but a Republican conservative passed away, and a Republican president was elected.
The Republican Party doesn't have a right to a majority on the United States Supreme Court.
Well,
So
the
when
way it's
you're
been going,
moving from
the
4
election
to
dictates,
4,
right?
When you're moving from 4-4 to 5-4, that's the big shift, particularly if they're going to run these 5-4 plays, decision after decision after decision, 20 times in a row, always for the benefit of the big corporations.
But no, let's not kid ourselves. The White House is the nominating vehicle, and the White House is won, strangely, by a rather strange Republican. No doubt about that. We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, your perspective is not the one that carried the nation.
Unless you count the popular vote, but that's a whole different story.
Well, what I'm saying is that most people reconcile the idea that the winner gets the spoils.
Yeah, but you see, that's just the point that I think we need to try to get more away from. And it worries me that we are at a point where we see the Supreme Court as the subject, as a political prize to whose team the spoils of being able to control the court go. It shouldn't be that way.
Amen.
And there's nothing that prevents a president of the United States from calling in the Democratic leader in the Senate and calling in the Republican leader in the Senate and saying, let's figure out a way to announce a name where you guys can be standing beside me when we announce this name, and have the person go through with 90 votes.
Well, you know what?
Nothing prevents that from happening except that they decided not to go that path.
Right.
And that's part of the concern, is that they appear to be delivering for the people who were delivering for them politically, and that's not where the court should go.
And so they deliver the nuclear option, and so out goes the filibuster, which I am worried about. I want to see the Senate in a more contemplative mode.
Yeah.
But you guys knew what they were going to do. You guys couldn't see past it for the bigger picture, so that's what we get. We get the nuclear option, and now this next Senate race, and you're running for re-election, is going to be all about the Supreme Court again in what will be a 51-49 projected decision process. And do you think the filibuster ever comes back forevermore? Or are there cooler heads that prevail, and we'll have a chance to be more deliberative and contemplative in this process?
I think the idea of requiring a supermajority to confirm executive appointees is probably over with this decision. The other appointees had already all gone. The one place that was
Democrats
saved,
did that, by the way.
They did. The one place that had been set aside by everybody's agreement was that the Supreme Court was different. That got set aside. But the big fence here, the great big beautiful wall, is between nominations and legislation. And what we're seeing is very strong signals from John Cornyn, the Republican majority whip, the number 2 guy, who sits on the Judiciary Committee, saying in his Judiciary Committee speech, this ends with nominees. We are not going to do this with legislation. And I think that's the big obstacle that will still protect the Senate as a collegial body, as the cooling saucer.
Well, remind everybody what supermajorities are necessary when it comes to legislation.
60.
But for every piece of legislation.
Well, pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. There's
Right.
strange circumstances, like a Congressional Review Act proceeding that if it's timely filed to a recent regulation, you can get to 51. Or under the budget process, there's that complicated reconciliation mechanism where you can end up with a 51 vote.
Every other bill,
but by and large,
health care, a small thing like that, right.
By and large, most legislation, virtually all, is going to require 60 votes, which means that in the Senate, you've got to find a way to try to make it bipartisan, which is good.
All right, we'll talk about that when we come back. The health care legislation is important. What's going on with Russia, the Syrian attack, the whole thing.
We are entitled to investigate under the Constitution They have executive responsibilities, and if we are only connecting with one another in a classified fashion, I don't think that serves the public interest.
This whole conversation with Russia, subheadline now after we throw 59 Tomahawks into the northwestern portion of Syria. We'll talk about that coming up. What do you make of this? Most of this turbulence has been on the House side, Devin Nunes, and I don't know what the hell that was, that roller coaster ride back and forth between the White House and the Capitol.
That was like a bad comedy show. That was
Yeah.
like an episode of Veep.
Yeah. Can't argue that. As best as you can, give me an objective viewpoint as to where you think this thing is going.
The Russians have developed a playbook for messing in other countries' elections. They started playing it in their former Soviet states. They pushed on into EU countries where they're now messing around in elections in a significant way. And in the past election, they jumped the Atlantic and for a first time at this level, played very significantly in the American elections. So what we are looking at in our Judiciary Subcommittee, Senator Lindsey Graham and I, is what does that Russian election manipulation playbook look like? We've had that hearing.
Right.
The next one we're going to have is what tools did they use in the United States? And we're working towards finding out precisely what took place and also developing the legislation so that in the future, as Lindsey says, this happened to, the Republicans were the beneficiaries of this time, but there's no reason that that could be the case next time.
No, I think
it could go either way, and we can't have a country whose elections are subject to manipulation by foreign powers.
It seems to me that the Senate, maybe it's the nature of the game, more of establishment politics in the Senate perhaps, but it seems that the Senate Republicans have a much more objective view of this, or at least that's the feel that the American public gets in terms of how to get about this. Of course, it's the congressional, it was the House hearings that have been this wacky thing, and Nunes, just recusing himself for the specific Russian question is laughable on its face, in my judgment. Where's the play going to be on this particular matter? Is it going to be in the House? Is it going to be in the Senate?
I think both are going to go forward. My bet would be on the Senate because of what you said. I think there's more steady momentum, bipartisan momentum, working in the Senate through these committees, whereas the House, they keep kind of banging and crashing into each other and into the White House. And I think the big play will ultimately come when either people start cooperating with the FBI in this investigation, and it moves to a much more impactful phase than just the early stages, or when we begin to subpoena documents in Congress.
Look, your prosecutorial experience favors you in this particular case. So when Flynn's lawyer proffers that he'd like to talk, with immunity offered, we've had this play in Iran-Contra before. You've got to be very careful about taking the low-hanging fruit and seeing what damage could go on down the line.
Yep.
Interesting play. What does your prosecutorial head tell you about what Flynn's lawyer is trying to do for Flynn and how that impacts not only Senate and congressional and House hearings, but FBI and that?
I think there's a realistic chance that Mike Flynn is already cooperating with the FBI in their executive branch criminal and national security investigation. When he was approached by the House committee, or somebody made a public signal, should we get him in, then his lawyer had to respond and say, well, what are we going to say about that? Well, the obvious thing is, we're not talking to you guys unless we get immunity from you. That's kind of the automatic play. So that's
dangerous to take that play, though. On the hearing side, because it can conflict.
You don't necessarily want to do that, and certainly there would be some rapid back-channel communications if indeed he were already cooperating with the FBI,
so
and suddenly a congressional committee came jumping in and suddenly immunized him and took him out of the box that had him cooperating.
Behind the scenes, what are Republican senators telling you about the Trump tweet on the Obama wiretap? It accelerated this conversation to a point of theatrical ridiculous, it seems. but now is something that nobody seems to we can't get away from it. And all he had to do is say, hey, my bad, I had a bad Saturday morning. We'll never do that.
Yeah.
What are they saying?
That it was very poor move. They,
I mean, I know what they say on the record, but I mean,
no, I mean, behind the
what's the
scenes,
flavor?
I think they think that this was a really amateurish, dumb move by the president. They get
Did they reach out
that he
behind-
has this habit of throwing a sparkly object
Right.
out in front of the media when the issue becomes something he doesn't want the issue to be. So this was obviously a big flare to redirect everybody's attention, but it redirected it in such a bad way for the president that he kind of got burned with his own flare. if you
It
don't
impacted
mind
the
me.
healthcare conversation, didn't it? I think that the tone during that week, there was not enough substantive belief in where the president was going to be. I think that wiretap tweet impacted his ability to bring that thing over the line.
That's an interesting thought. I had not heard that said before, but with you saying it, I agree with you. I think that Republicans who feel vulnerable when they're going to be asked to take tough votes look over their shoulders and they want to see, is this a capable White House? Is this a White House that will truly have my back? Is this a White House that I can count on? And when you see the White House indulging in these kind of wacky behaviors, those three answers don't come back yes.
And so now we have the Syrian situation. Do you support, by the way, the Tomahawk missile?
Yeah.
Like you do.
Yeah.
You're confident that the team, at least that the president has built around him in defense and security, and that group is as competent a team as
Yes.
we've had?
Yes.
So you sleep at night all right?
Well, the president still has the button. But I do think that there is a cordon of mature experience around the White House that is very reassuring to have there. Bear in mind that at a hearing in the Senate Armed Services Committee held by the Republicans, one of the Republican witnesses testified that we needed to get Mattis cleared quickly for Secretary of Defense because of all the crazy, wrong, and illegal decisions that we could expect to have come out of the White House. So when that's the Republican testimony about this White House on national security matters in a hearing called by the Republicans in the Senate, there's a pretty strong sense, I think, throughout Washington that we really needed that cordon of grown-ups in national security matters. And I think General Kelly, General Mattis, to a lesser degree, but Mike Pompeo at the CIA, Dan Coates, I think these people qualify to build that cordon. And I do sleep better than I would if they were all, Bannons and kind of characters from the far-right fringe.
Bannon's lost his mind in the last week or so, it seems. Yeah?
I'm not sure I would agree that he was ever of his sound mind to begin with, but he's an interesting character, let's put it that way.
Re-election season not too far away. We'll talk about it next.
Every member of Congress wants to be president. Let's be real. There's a senator named Sheldon Whitehouse. That is the most ambitious name for a title you will never have. That's like my name being Hassan, head of Homeland Security. It's just not happening.
For some reason, I've got a little play today.
I like that
just because
joke.
he's now the White House correspondent's choice. I guess in politics, just spell the name correctly, right? For the most part.
Nothing wrong with that joke.
You enjoy that.
Yeah?
Is there any White House aspiration?
Nope.
Ever?
None.
None? We've asked you that before.
None.
I've often told the senator, I don't know anybody in the public game who enjoys his gig more than you.
I do
hasn't-
love the Senate.
That hasn't changed.
And I look forward to working with a strong Democratic president in the White House in due course. There's a lot of great work to be done in this country, so I'd be excited for that, but I'm not going to be that person.
Well, look, the polarization of America is an interesting thing, and even in Rhode Island, I feel it. I mean, I have felt it on the radio, being a guy who's perceived as, moderate right at least, who didn't buy Trump's act at all. It's been a rough ride, weekdays 3 to 6 on WPRO, with some folks who have, a conservative thought process, most of whom who dial the show, not necessarily listen to the show. But you've got the same kind of bifurcated situation now. You've got a lot of suburban towns that went the way of Donald Trump in this election season. So it ain't a gimme. And if Bob Flanders gets into this thing, he's a blue chip candidate, is he not?
We'll see. Nobody's a blue chip candidate until they've won a race.
He's a blue chip candidate. He's a former state Supreme Court justice, and he's a well-respected guy. My judgment is
no, I think
that he's a blue chip candidate.
Okay,
Bob Nordlittle, the state rep, it's not a blue chip candidate.
Running a
Flanders
political
is.
race is a brand new skill set, and I don't think you can necessarily translate being a state Supreme Court justice into being a effective candidate. So we will see. But at the moment, nobody's yet declared, and we're well over a year away from any primary. So there's a lot of playing out that remains to be done before this race takes shape.
Am I hearing you say you don't think he's going to run?
I don't know what he's going to do. I don't know if he's going to run or not. I don't know if Representative Nardillo is going to run or not. I don't know if they're both going to run. I don't know who wins the primary if they both do.
Nardillo reportedly is announcing in May. I would think if I'm
And there
Flanders,
may be others that come in. Once you get a two-person primary, suddenly it gets interesting for others.
Why
So
do you
remains
have
to be seen.
why do you have such a sly grin on your face when we talk about this? It's as if you almost can't wait.
Well, first of all, I don't mind the conversation about politics.
I know that.
I like races, and it's a great opportunity to get out there with people, do my community dinners, be active. And I also will be interested to hear how the Republican Party is able to defend the President Trump administration. It's going to be an interesting predicament, I think.
I've said all along, once you're entrenched, and you are now, it's kind of a corporate note to you and Jack Reed for the most part. You'd have to do something really stupid or criminal not to win re-election. Flanders, though, is a test. You would suggest that it's a whole different ballgame, and I can't wait to see if
Maybe
if
he'll
that's
be a
the
great
case.
candidate. One doesn't know, though, and at the moment he's not even declared, so I'm not going to get myself into too much excitement about it.
This notion that you have become, by the way, along with Senator Reed, a national figure out of Rhode Island. I'd like to see us
Not like Jack.
Huh?
Jack is a very special.
No, but you've got a different
Guy.
tact. You're the guy they say, hey Sheldon, you go do it. You're the muckraker, and you enjoy it. You enjoy causing a little turbulence, don't you?
I do. There are some very, very big, very self-satisfied interests in Washington, and I love shaking them up. I don't like to see our country controlled by them. I don't like the fact that they try to operate behind the scenes and through string pulling and dark money rather than standing up like grown men and sticking up for their own views. And I love going after them because I think they're doing bad things.
Good to see you.
It's good to see you, Dan.
We'll tell you what's up tomorrow when we come back. Stay with us. Conservatives put out an ad to kind of make fun of Rhode Island liberals. We'll talk about that tomorrow. See ya.